right. Good evening or early morning, depending on what part of the world you are watching from right now. I have to admit that I am a little bit embarrassed at the woeful lack of Civil War content that has been on my channel in the past 6 months or so. I've had a little bit here and there, and plan on getting back into some Civil War content here soon. But to hold us over until then, wanted to do a little bit of a Civil War themed live stream this evening. Now, I think in the history community, you have people who are like casual Civil War enthusiasts. And then if you narrow that field down a little bit more, you get into like the real Civil War nerds. And I would count myself in that crowd. I just eat up anything that I can. Now, beyond that, if you go even narrower, there's this little subset of people who are Civil War photography nerds. And I'm kind of in that community a little bit myself because I'm really into it. As a matter of fact, I got a book on Civil War photography just out of reach here. But among that group, well, there's only one person who can wear the crown as the king of the Civil War photography nerds, and that is Garry Adelman.
Hey, JD. Hello, everybody. Thanks so much for having me, and I'm honored with the title.
I appreciate you jumping on here this evening because I know that you're a super busy guy and are kind of in high demand. So this was kind of short notice. So yeah. Hey, but before we get going talking about Civil War photography and specifically Cold Harbor, I mean, I kind of know your backstory a little bit, but for people who watch the American Battlefield Trust videos and things like that, which, by the way, for people who are unfamiliar with Garry, he is with the American Battlefield Trust, amazing organization that we'll be talking about a little bit this evening. Tell me a little bit about the genesis of this obsession with Civil War photography.
Yeah, thanks, JD. And again, hello, everybody, for just joining. I was a D history student at Evanston Township High School outside Chicago. I had little interest in reading at the time. And then the last day of my sophomore year, I picked up a book by William Fresnito. Let me show you. This book. And maybe even this very copy of this book, William Fresnito's Antietam, The Photographic Legacy of America's Bloodiest Day. I didn't know there were photos that old as this 16-year-old, and I didn't know that you could go back to the places. And his book has then and now photographs, and I was a then and now person even before I knew it was a thing. And I became instantly obsessed, started reading for pleasure for the first time in my life, couldn't wait to read more, go to Gettysburg, and took my first trip when I was 21. And then I never looked back. I took 11 more trips in the next few years, moved there in 1992, became a battlefield guide, started writing as much as I could. And then, was still running restaurants. That was my past life. I opened a restaurant in Gettysburg. Eventually the college bought my restaurant. And then I went out of restaurants and got into the history field through a publisher, then through a historical consulting firm, which eventually brought me full-time 14 years ago to, it's reversed, to the American Battlefield Trust.
And for those who aren't familiar, the American Battlefield Trust is an amazing organization. If you follow my content or page or anything like that, it's one of the few organizations that I really bang the drum for because I believe in what they do. They're all about education. And something that I am exceptionally passionate about is battlefield preservation. I think that's one thing. And we obviously with History Traveler, everything that I do there is with place and being able to go to the battlefields, to go to the historic sites and learn about the history. And they do an amazing job and also have a stellar YouTube channel that has taught me so much about the Civil War. As a matter of fact, if you have enjoyed any of the Civil War content that I've done, you can thank the American Battlefield Trust because I kind of watched their videos and stole their stuff. And then Garry and some of the other guys have been on there at times. Now, right now on your channel, you guys are running an Overland campaign series,
Yes.
which has been really, really good.
Yeah, I'm glad you like. And by the way, you're always super generous to us. We appreciate that. And to all y'all who cross over, cross dress on both channels, we really appreciate it. And yeah, Chris White, my colleague, he and I co-run the education department at the Trust. He loves himself some Fredericksburg, Spotsylvania, Cold Harbor, and stuff like that. So he put this together, and I'm really pleased with what we're seeing, and people seem to like them. So I'm glad you're enjoying.
My very first battlefield that I visited from the Civil War was Spotsylvania.
Wow.
When I was, I take that back. When I was a kid, I went to a Civil War reenactment. I'm talking like little Civil War reenactment down in New Madrid, Missouri. My aunt was a site manager of the historic site down there. But very first Civil War battlefield that I went to there in the East was at Spotsylvania Courthouse, and went there with Gary Gallagher. I was part of a group that he was with. It's Gary Gallagher and Ed Ayers.
Man, not bad at all. And by the way, I can tell you're from that part of the world because you said New Madrid. Well done.
So we're going to be talking Cold Harbor and a little bit the Overland campaign and everything this evening. And there are a lot of photos that came out or that were taken during that period of time. So 1864, I mean, photography is kind of coming into its own during the Civil War period. Are there more photos that we're starting to see in 1864 and 1865 compared to like 1863? Is there more to choose from?
That's a hard thing to say. I mean, the most photographed places off the top of my head, we're talking about really, you could make that argument because Richmond and Washington, D.C. by 1865 become the most photographed Civil War places. But as to the wartime places, I mean, it is Port Hudson, Louisiana, Brandy Station, Virginia. Those are 1863 bleeding into 64 type of things. Gettysburg is in the top 10 somewhere, but Chattanooga, late 63, 64. So I think that's a good argument you could make. People are starting to see that newspapers are hungry for it, that the public is hungry to purchase stereo views, 3D photos, that they can look into their special little viewers and whatnot. So more photographers. There were thousands of photographers in the 1860s in America, but only a handful. I mean, we can count them. Actually left their studios and engaged in the speculative work of following armies around and trying to photograph battlefields. It was a very highly risky financial event, not to mention personally risky in a couple of cases as well. So I think that there's an argument you could be making. There are 4 different photographic firms. Remember, these are all Northerners. The South had long ran out of photochemicals, and there aren't, after 1861, real Southern photographers following armies around. It just didn't happen. So 4 are following for the Overland campaign, but only one during the war proper was actually on the field at Cold Harbor to hit the jackpot.
Okay. Now, when it comes to Cold Harbor, I'm going to admit that's a weak area for me. I don't know as much about it. Can you maybe kind of, before we dive into the photos, kind of set this battle up for us? What's going on?
Yes, and let me hit you with an overall too. I mean, even people for whom it's not unfamiliar, might be subscribing to a whole lot of old myths and tropes. I mean, most of what people know about Cold Harbor is wrong. Number one, that there was one attack, and that one attack cost Grant 7,000 casualties in 30 minutes. Instead, this is a 2-week slug it out like Spotsylvania with some highlights. June 3rd was definitely the big day, but there was attacks on the 1st and on the 7th and desultory fighting the whole time. But the day we talk about is what you're seeing on this map here. And what happens is during the Overland campaign, after the Wilderness in Spotsylvania, that's in May of 1864, there are other battles people don't talk about at the North Anna River and Bethesda Church, Totopotomoy, Hawes Shop. And that all led the armies, when Grant kept moving forward, trying to get toward Richmond, toward this area, the Cold Harbor Crossroads, which you can see on the sort of middle upper center, if that makes any sense, of your map. To the left of Hancock is the Cold Harbor Crossroads. You can see 5 roads coming together to the upper left of a blue chunk on the right side of the map there. And that was an important crossroads. They fought over that on June 1st. The Union captured it. And Robert E. Lee is in trouble. If you look at his red troops on the left side of the map, if they go backward, they're going to be backing into a 1-mile wide swamp. So they've got their backs to a river, and behind that is the city of Richmond, the Confederate capital. So the stakes are high. But what does happen on June 2nd and 3rd is that Lee constructs some of the strongest breastworks, earthworks seen to date. They could be log, they could be earth, stone if they even had them, but they could be 1, 2, 3 deep. They could also have traverses that could allow an enemy to turn to one side or the other to, deal with an enemy coming from that side. So when the Union did launch these attacks on June 3rd, 1864. They were particularly costly. Not everybody who was supposed to go forward went forward. And to set the stage on what you're looking at here, if you look sort of toward the middle of the map, you see Russell, and you sort of just see a divider here between the green and the blue or brown colors there. That's, the Cold Harbor Road. And on the north side of that road is where the visitor center is and most of the preserved battlefield that you see in green there. That's where the 6th Corps was at least supposed to attack in force, and where the 18th Corps fought. And what most people don't know is that probably the biggest single attack was on the south side of the road, and you see that sea of blue moving in, and you see them actually penetrating the southern line south of the road there. These are Barlow's guys and Gibbon's guys, the 2nd Corps. That was such a tough fighting unit by then. The Southerners, as they always did up until late, April of 1865, found the reinforcements necessary to push back the mighty Union host. And this was a bloodbath, and it was multiple attacks, and Grant said he regretted the last one of those attacks. But you be Grant, you're looking at Richmond, you're 8 miles from it, you've got your enemy against a river, and he miscalculated. He thought after all this fighting at Wilderness, at Wilderness and Spotsylvania and Totopotomoy, North Anna, that the enemy was just ready to snap. He was wrong about Lee's army at that point. He could read Lee very well, but he messed up that time, and he admitted it.
Now, with this map that we are currently looking at, for anybody watching this, these are all accessible on the website of the American Battlefield Trust. It's an outstanding resource to help you kind of understand the battle. And I'm a visual person, many people are, and this is definitely a great resource. Now, Gary, correct me if I'm wrong. The light blue areas that we are looking at right there, these are portions of the battlefield that were saved by the American Battlefield Trust, correct?
Yes, correct. I'll say by the members of the American Battlefield Trust, because as our members know, we send out letters, we come up with deals, and we need their help 13 times a year and sometimes more. Not everybody donates to that much, but we get matching funds together and save land, and it is a puzzle piece. Make no mistake, each one of those pieces of blue or portions thereof required a contract with a landowner. We can't make anybody sell. We hope they'll do the right thing. And yes, you can see on this map, and the light blue and the orange, and the yellow are things we're trying to preserve, where we're still raising funds. So you see we have a big chunk down on the southern end over there that we're working on, one of our most important things, because this is not only the Battle of Cold Harbor, the Battle of Gaines's Mill was fought over a lot of this same land. And yes, you can see all these maps. We have hundreds of them on our website. We have animated maps that allow things to play out that way. We also have we have 3 books about our maps: Eastern Theater, Western Theater, and Revolutionary War maps as well, wherever quality Civil War and Rev War books are sold.
Okay. You made the clarification that it's the members of the American Battlefield Trust that saved that land. I'm a member, so I'm going to go ahead and take credit for saving Cold Harbor there.
Thank you, JD.
So if we move on here, this is an old map that I pulled off of the Library of Congress. And again, you can kind of see, a little bit of then and now. And then if you zoom in a little bit further, there in the middle, close to Bethesda Church, you see Grant's headquarters. And Gary, this is a photo that anybody who has ever watched a documentary or read a book or seen anything on Grant has seen this photo, but may not know anything about where it was taken.
Yes. So first of all, I'll say that, we don't, that's one of the few maps that actually purports to show Grant's headquarters. You would think this would be easy to figure it out because he spent a solid couple of weeks at this particular headquarters. But when you're near a road in the woods, it's not necessarily that easy. We know it's between Old Cold Harbor and a place called Old Church. So we know approximately where it may have been. And this is the case with all the Corps commanders. And let me note that I mentioned earlier that Matthew Brady really hit the jackpot. What I mean by that is that him and his crew came upon a place where the Union Army happened to be for a couple of weeks after this fighting. And for 2 days in June, the 11th and 12th, from what we understand, they recorded at least 20 and probably more photographs at Cold Harbor on those dates that included this man, the commander of all the armies, the commander of the largest army, George Gordon Meade, as well as one with his staff, and then the Corps commanders, Horatio Wright, who replaced Sedgwick, and other guys like Ambrose Burnside commanding the 9th Corps, and Winfield Scott Hancock, the most famous picture of him and some of his division commanders and his staff. So it was just golden for these photographers who could secure it and sell it to a distribution house. But this one is certainly the best known photo of Grant in the Civil War.
And with these photos, the resolution is absolutely phenomenal. Like, I can download these and I can zoom way in and not lose any of the image quality. What's going on?
Yes, I'm glad.
Why
Yes,
is my phone in 2024 not doing as well as a big camera in 1864?
Yeah, it's simple. Digital things have pixels and film has grain. And the wet plate photographic process, which is a chemical sheet, doesn't have either of those things. So not only was it a chemical sheet that theoretically is limited by the molecular size, but they're also big. At least I and many of y'all watching grew up with 35 millimeter negatives, an inch wide and less than an inch tall. These negatives were 4 by 10 inches, or they were 7 by 9 inches, 25, 45 times larger than the negatives we grew up with. Take that and then add to it that, that there was no grain or pixelation, and you have a recipe for a higher resolution than the best digital cameras can achieve today. And as an example, I'll say that I've seen Civil War photos where you can zoom in from 15 feet away, from a person who's 15 feet away, and see the cracks on his hands, or even fingerprints in some cases. So once your digital camera can do that, there's someone watching with a really good SLR, and they're saying, well, I can do that. Well, try that. And then we can start to talk about resolution. Now, what I'll say is a lot of the things you can see when you zoom in were never the intention of the photographer, but it's a grand time of Civil War photography that we can find whole new pictures within pictures because the people like the Library of Congress have taken the time to high resolution scan these items so that they don't have to come out of storage and we can see everything we need to.
Awesome. So the next picture, if people will take a close look at Grant and that tree that he's leaning on. So I'll go back. Here's the wide. You can kind of see the details there. This is something that I like doing if I can come across a group of photographs, is look and see if the photographer is, changing angles or anything like that. What are we looking at here? Do you know?
So so this is the not always popular Assistant Secretary of War, Charles Dana, who appears with Grant not only here, but also in the Massaponax Church series, which is taken in late May, a few weeks earlier than this. So more than once, he is joining Grant in the field as sort of, I would say, a de facto internal spy, you might say, for Secretary of War Edwin Stanton. I mean, no military man loves the civilian authority breathing down their neck. And looking at them and scrutinizing them, especially while you're making momentous decisions. Imagine the moral fiber that Grant had when that picture was taken, having made mistakes, attack after attack. Yeah. Some of them work, some don't. You have to live with it and do it again. And here's this guy, so I don't think he was exactly well liked in the high ranks of the Army, but I don't know if there's such thing as anybody in his position who could be especially well liked. And as you alluded to, he's sitting in front of the same tree. You can see the same tent in the background. I'll encourage y'all who don't get enough out of this to, of course, go to the Library of Congress, but also my mentor, William Fresnito, also has a book on this, Grant and Lee, the Virginia Campaigns, and he presents many of the Cold Harbor photos that were taken there, and he talks about Dana and provides more information. And of course, Wikipedia for Civil War stuff is pretty good. There's so many Civil War nerds out there that it's policed pretty well. So I think there's a lot of ways, and of course, you can go to battlefields.org or watch mine or JD or Chris. Chris is vlogging through history videos. You have a lifetime's worth of work with those sources alone. I'm thankful for this because this one shows more of the tent than the Grant picture does. So
yeah. And I like going in, and I mean, you can see like it appears that they took these photos at the same time and just kind of like swapped places. Like the chair is the same. If you look at the tent, the folds are all the same where the wrinkles are, and then you get to where this rope is tied off. Here was something that I thought was exceptionally cool in this photo, is that if you look back in the shadows.
Oh yeah, that's awesome.
What are we looking at here?
So what I don't know if y'all can see it at home. It looks a little blurry here. It looks like we need some more glass plate work here, but that's a crate that says Grant on it. So, how cool. I mean, that determines it's probably not in front of Dana's tent. That is Grant's headquarters tent. They set it up right in front of his. I wonder if the chair is his. Sometimes he's sitting in a weird chair, and other pictures from various series during this campaign. And that just adds something to it. You think, what's Grant taking with him? What are people sending him? What is important to have with the Army commander? You could argue the largest army in the world, or army group in the world at the time. What does he have going on? And again, you did it, JD. You found, its own picture within another picture. It's fun.
I want to know where that crate's at, is what
Yeah,
I want to
man.
know.
Yeah. I wish wooden stuff from the Civil War lasted better. We've all seen a lot of metal in museums. The wood is pretty rare.
All right. So then here you can kind of see the side by side where who knows who took the picture first, but you can see the movement of the chair. And then again, you can kind of compare the folds in the tent and everything like that.
And one thing I find interesting before you switch, I don't know if you saw, I happened to put it up today, but I've put it up many a time, that the original photo of Grant was a much wider plate. It showed more of the tent like it does for Dana, except that they wanted to focus in on Grant and get rid of all that canvas. So they actually masked the glass plate negative so that they could print something much tighter. And that's really what you see here. And then they took pictures of that plate and made a new plate from it and things like that. It's pretty interesting.
Was there any loss of quality as they did that?
Absolutely, like anything else, but I mean, if you could figure out how to do a direct contact print from glass to glass, that's pretty good. That's going to be pretty solid. And just like when you do a book and a second book and a third book, or you post it on Facebook and then download it and then use that again, you're going to have some loss of fidelity. Absolutely. But these negatives weren't seen as witness glass like we see it now, the precious holdings at the time. A lot of the Library of Congress negatives were cut by the photographic houses that wanted to make them the exact size of the photos they needed. So they cut out key parts of, photos and whatnot, because they didn't see these things, the plates themselves, as the treasures that people like you and I, Civil War photo nerds, would see them as.
Okay. So this next one I wanted to throw in just because many people, at least for me, my introduction into a broad 30,000 foot view of the Civil War was a book called Battle Cry of Freedom. And this, I'm pretty sure, at least on the copy that I have, is it's not a photo, but a painting or drawing that is on the cover of the one that I have. Do we know which part of the battle or what day this is depicting here? Whoop, we lost your audio, Gary.
Sorry, my dog was barking, so I turned it off. This is one of a series of, lithographs and artworks that you would see. Prang is a typical one. I don't know if this is one of those, but that really sort of make things a lot neater. And you've always got the flags right there. You've always got the smoke. You have some, dramatic deaths and things like that. I'm not sure if it shows anything very realistic at the time, but of course, this is how I came up with this and the American heritage and whatnot. And I do think that they tend to pick a generic scene to show something, unless there's the Burnside Bridge in it or something like that. I'm not aware that we can pinpoint exactly what this is. I do see, what am I seeing in the background there? I should have zoomed in before. Sorry, everybody. Oh, so it looks like we got a little fortress there. I mean, I don't know that there's a real high up revetted fort at Cold Harbor like that. So, I think these are great for instilling an interest in people, but these old style lithographs are at the least highly dramatized and not necessarily something on which I'd base my doctoral dissertation.
All right. Well, let's look at some of the photos that were taken on the battlefield. I'm assuming right after the battle. And I'm just going to have you kind of just tell us what we're looking at here.
Yeah. So
we're looking through a pair of binoculars here, right?
Yes, of course. So most Civil War photos were taken in 3D. People don't know this. This is no gimmick. If you see a Civil War 3D book, it's because the photographers used a twin lens camera with lenses an eye width apart, and they would make a plate like this, 4 by 10 inches, and then they could print this, and then they could cut it in half, reverse them, and put them into a viewer. Y'all have seen these in your grandparents' parlors or your parents, or maybe you have one, a Holmes-based viewer. And when you looked at it that way, you could see it in 3D. This was the Blockbuster Video or the Netflix of its day. This is how you traveled the world. You could see the pyramids of Egypt and the Leaning Tower of Pisa in 3D through this technology, something that was known, the idea of it was known decades before the Civil War, but the stereo view craze really came about in the 1850s when this wet plate process allowed the mass reproduction of prints, and they started selling like crazy. Okay, so this is a stereoscopic or 3D photo of the old Cold Harbor Tavern. There's a new Cold Harbor and an old Cold Harbor, and both of them were there at the Civil War. And this is a place called Burnett's Tavern, known as Cold Harbor Tavern, which was like a community center, voting district, inn, and everything like that. And we still argue. We know that it's not cold in Virginia when they're there in June, and we know there's no harbor anywhere near there. There's a sluggish swamp nearby. So we assume that they're getting hot, like cool harbor or cold harbor. You're going to get a cold meal, and you can get harbor from your weary travelers and stay in the inn or something like that. So we're looking at that. I think I remember you were going to have some zoom ins here. And while you're doing that, let me just say, and by the way, for everybody watching, I wish I'm talking so much, surprising everybody in the room, that I'm not getting to look at all your questions. So I do hope we get to deal with some of those before too long. But there are 2 series of Cold Harbor photos during the war. One by Brady and Company on June 11 and 12, and then some around the surrounding dates when it comes to show this. And then, of course, once the photographers for the North were able to access the battlefield proper, the Union did not break through the Confederate line at this battle, so they couldn't access most of the battlefield until later. And then they would come back in April of 1865 and secure more photos by a guy named John Reekie. But here, as you zoom in, you see soldiers in the midst of the Battle of Cold Harbor, but far enough in the rear by this point where they felt safe. As far as I know, a shell went screaming through the house at one point. You can see some of these soldiers, and I think you have one more zoom in, JD, if I'm correct.
No, I think this is as far as I went.
Well, then let me ask you if you see those 2 leaning trees at center and left, if you look between them in the distance, you can see a kind of a dark blob. That's an earthwork. There are soldiers behind that dark earthwork. So, I mean, the earthworks went right up to the Cold Harbor Tavern, which is right at the crossroads. You're seeing one of the roads there in the foreground. And the American Battlefield Trust preserved this property and took down the non-historic building there. And then we made a digital version of it and put up signs there. So we've really made a difference there.
So let's actually take a look at that.
Okay.
So
he's going off script here. Yeah.
Yeah. So here's something that you will never see on my channel. And it is just crazy cool. Gary, can you see this as I'm sharing it?
I can.
Okay. So here I'm going to play it and just kind of describe to me what we are looking at here.
Okay, good. Let's see how it plays. I don't know how videos do on live stream. So this is an animated virtual reality sort of video we made. We had commissioned, actually. And what you're doing is you were looking from an 1864 sketch into our virtual reality thing. And it's a video on the Trust page where I narrate it like JD doesn't have the sound on now, but you see we're going up to that earthwork on the left is the one I pointed out in the background of the photo. And then we're actually going up toward the porch of the old Cold Harbor Tavern. In our augmented reality app, you can go into the tavern and see what it looked like inside. So we think you might be able to see the shell hole actually in the roof below one of the gables. The tree is sort of blocking it, but take a look near the middle, and I think you might see the artillery shell hole we generically placed there. And we worked pretty hard to get it right. You can see the building sort of up on stilts. There's no real foundation there, but we have found evidence using ground penetrating radar about roughly where it was. And it seems to be right near the road, next to where, but not right where we have parking today. And you can see it zooming back out from the drawing and now into the photo that JD had just shown. So our digital rendering artist, Rob Cloutier, was really careful to try to get these details right so it would match up well. And I think we end this in zooming back. Yes, in zooming back over to this. Super cool. I'm glad you showed me that.
Absolutely love it. Just one of the many amazing things that you all have on your YouTube page. All right, let me get back to our photos here. All right, I got another one with a group, and we'll kind of zoom in a little bit. So what are we looking at here?
So again, while Grant was at Cold Harbor, now again, some of these photos are often confused and labeled as City Point, including the one of him leaning on the tree. Grant at City Point, Grant at Cold Harbor. People, they don't know. You can't write on a glass plate negative. So the original captions, where the photographers made were often, not available, gone, and people would sometimes intentionally use things for their book. If they wanted to show City Point, well, there's Granite City Point, so they're often mixed up, but there is a big series there. But this one is at Cold Harbor there, and there he is standing in front of his tent at I think another location, at least slightly moved, or a different tent, with some of his staff. And as you zoom in, you might be able to start to see some people. Sitting at left is Grant's main man and his best friend in the war, John Rawlins, who sometimes has a big beard and sometimes within a month of now is just totally clean shaven. You might be able to pick out Seneca Indian Eli Parker, and there's other people. One guy on the right seems to be giving us some sort of a signal, almost like doing something toward us, and that's something I like too, because the way they acted humanizes them.
Early gang signs.
Yeah. I wasn't going to say it, but who knows? I mean, some of these guys, sometimes they look like they're holding a cell phone or something like that. But, there is this thing. This is a work of art for people. They're often looking away from the camera because, there was no rule that said you're going to do X. You're not going to smile, or you are going to smile, or you're going to look right at the camera. And you can see the photographer carefully did all this and told people what to do. Everybody looking in the same direction was boring then. Often in group shots, someone's going to put an arm on someone's shoulder or thrust their hand in like a Napoleonic pose. There's a lot of tricks that even the modern wet plate photographers who practice the craft use.
Is there any reason why a lot of them seem to always be looking off camera? Was that just kind of a style that they did, or?
Yeah, I think that's it. But, you think about, if this followed artworks and paintings, in how many paintings do you have a group of everyone looking at the camera? Yeah. It's pretty rare. In how many paintings are people smiling? So I think that they were probably thinking about the previous art form. To us, it's obvious to look at a camera and smile. They didn't grow up with that. And suddenly there's this new form of portraiture. Some called it magic or the devil's work when it first started coming around, So I think the photographers realized that they were going to make a bigger art, like a better work of art. By having a more real scene, because how many times in life is everybody looking at the same point?
Here's a pretty good question. How long do you have to strike a pose to get a full exposure there?
Yeah, Ghost of Sickle's Leg. I love your name. So it depended on the conditions entirely. It could depend upon your chemistry and the atmospheric conditions and everything, but more than anything, it's light. And I know of pictures that could be done in 1 or 2 seconds. And I know the standard, I would call it, 3 to 7 seconds. I know that's a wide thing, but your typical picture is going to be like that because some of the guys today are using the same recipes and equipment, sometimes the same cameras that they use. So we've been able to test it. But in really dark conditions, I've heard of 20, 25-second exposures. That also explains to you why people aren't holding smiles. And it also explains to you why they have these headrests. Sometimes you can see a device behind portrait standing people. You could see the feet of something, and that's a little clamp to keep at least their head in the same spot, where if they move their body, no big deal, but their head stays in the same place. I want to say one more thing, and that is to adding to the technology. One particular firm, Anthony, E&HT Anthony had come up with these called instantaneous views. They figured out how to capture a photo in 1/40th of a second and demonstrated it by showing traffic, wagons, of course, and people moving on Broadway in New York. And it worked. So it had it, but the photographers in the field didn't tend to have that technology.
Okay, interesting. So there's a lot of evolution going on, not only in war technology, but also photographic technology. That's interesting. I didn't know that.
Good, excellent.
Now we're getting on to the battlefield here. I have no idea where this is. All I know is that the Library of Congress labeled it Cold Harbor.
Yeah, and so what I would say is I only think I know where it might be because the dean of Richmond area photography, a guy named Mike Gorman, who runs a great website called Civil War Richmond. You just Google it and there it is. And he puts it all out there for you. And I'm talking about thousands of newspaper accounts and hundreds of photos and everything like that. He has a theory about this. But before I do, this is in I believe Gardner's photographic sketchbook of the Civil War. This would be one of those Reiki photos. Notice that you don't see any soldiers in there. You see I think you might focus in on a human that's barely visible in there. But you can see the nature of these breastworks. This was called a picket post. So in other words, not the main line, but rather, an advanced line looking out and giving warning of the enemy and shooting some pot shots at them if they start coming toward you. And you see, they're just using whatever's available, fence rails, a felled tree and whatnot. And if you'll zoom back out, JD, if you'll go to the previous one, what do you see in the foreground there? A road. And Mike Gorman strongly feels, but does not know. I want to be clear. He does not confirm this. But time and again, Civil War photos are taken along main avenues where they had to take their big photographic wagon with the complex chemicals and glass plates. It's not like they took them 600 yards off that road if they didn't need to. So photos were taken right near roads. And we know this photographer, Riki, was on this road when he shot a picture of the Gaines's mill, the actual mill site. So Mike thinks that this is looking roughly southwestward from about 150, 200 yards west of the visitor center, right over there. And that another famous set of photos is also taken there. And for what I can tell, I can buy it. And if he's right, all that land in the distance and the woods and everything like that was preserved by the members of the American Battlefield Trust, namely you, of course, JD.
Yes. You're welcome. Yeah, and then you really have to zoom in to catch this, but it gives you an idea of the scale where we can see this man on horseback.
Yeah, I think that's
or
great.
a Civil War ghost. I'm sorry, that's a Civil War ghost that this guy caught on film.
Oh my God, it'll become the bane of my existence if I say yes. So let me just say, JD, that by the way, first of all, my compliments on both the Grant one and this. I don't know why I've been screaming about it for more than a decade. Download the high-res version. This is for y'all listening and watching, and zoom in. And whether or not you make a big discovery, I think you're going to find things that you are curious about, that are of interest to you. And once in a while, you find something that'll make you talk out loud, wow, like even though you're alone while you're looking at it. So well done on these. Most people don't spot this one or the Grant case. And I think this is a great way to show that these fortifications might look shoddy, but I mean, this is a real deal thing. And this is just a picket post. I believe, by the way, you can see another fortification in the distance when you look right past the horse's head, that line over there, Mike Gorman. I mean, because we can all zoom in and look at this. We also have the benefits of maps by people like Mickler and others that we can determine, okay, well, where are the picket posts? Where are the main lines? Where are the woods? And Mike Gorman has used this to try to identify this location. And while it's not confirmed, it's what I have in my mind now because he makes a very compelling case.
Yeah, I call this like going in. And by the way, for people watching or listening, I sent Gary, all I did is I just pulled pictures from Cold Harbor and went and looked for stuff myself. He sent a few suggestions. But yeah, like you said, I was just zooming in and looking for these little details and things like that. I call it online archaeology. Just kind of
I like it.
The Library of Congress and the archives looking for stuff like this. Okay, now
let everybody watching, just real quick, JD, everybody watching, in case I start saying online archaeology, I want everybody to know that I've been saying that for decades. So if I start owning that term, it's not like I just learned that from JD today. No, I totally did. I love it.
Oh, dadgummit, here I thought I had something new and fresh and witty. Yeah,
you did. I assure you.
There's nothing new under the sun. Okay, now before I go to this next picture, I need to make a something very clear to the YouTube employee who is going to be watching this video after it gets demonetized or age restricted. What we are looking at are photos from the Civil War. This is strictly educational, and the photos that we are looking at are used by the National Park Service on their broadsides and on their signage in the field. So everyone ages 1 to 100 sees these photos. All right.
Can I add before you go into it?
Sure.
You know that soldiers in the Civil War, you got to know that if you died here, they dug a hole here and put you in it. Okay. Soldiers were buried where they fell, unless they died in a hospital, of course. So the battlefields were littered as cemeteries. Okay. Now later, when they established a national cemetery movement and one was established near a particular battlefield, they were often exhumed into other areas. And that's usually first Northerners, because they had the national cemetery movement and the money to move soldiers and reinter them, whereas the South struggled for a long time in removing their dead from battlefields. So go ahead, JD.
One other thing that I'll add, Gary and I have this thing where videos that we appear together on in YouTube are cursed. Something
kiss of death.
They get demonetized, they get age restricted, all kinds of terrible things. All right, here we go.
Yeah. This is pretty heavy. So what you're looking at is a lot of things. Here, obviously, you're seeing a stretcher with remains from the battle of about 10 months earlier. This is April of 1865. This is when John Reekie came through the area. It's a good thing to suspect that it might be on the same road on which he recorded his other photographs. And you see African-American black detail in the background conducting these exhumation exercises. What you're also seeing is a whole lot of disturbed earth. Now, is this earth that has been disturbed because they dug up so many remains and that is making earthworks, or is this along the earthworks? I can't quite tell while looking at this, but this is only one of at least 3 in the series.
So let's zoom in a little bit, and there in the back, it's a little bit blurred. Obviously, the focal point was what was in the foreground. But one thing that I found interesting, you said this is a series. So we have this gentleman in the background, obviously holding a shovel. And then in the next photo, or I don't know if this was before or after, or what order the photos were taken in, but
yeah. So
now we get a clearer look at him.
And you can even see when you really zoom in, you can see the knit hat, this dark colored hat that he's wearing. It's hard to tell color in black and white halftone photographs of the Civil War, and they're not like today's black and white, so it can be really difficult. So let me say a couple other things. So he was holding that shovel in the first photo. There's a shovel like it in the foreground, and the other guy on the right is holding one. This is a typical Union Army shovel of the time. You can see them at the National Civil War Museum in Harrisburg. Other people have these original shovels, and you can actually see those objects. I love seeking out objects in museums that can be seen in Civil War photographs. And of course, it makes sense that these things would be around. And then, of course, I'm sure the photographer was very deliberate in this. As the war went on, these Northern photographers were very anxious to show African-American subjects, especially them performing different roles, now exhuming, presumably, mostly at this point, Union soldiers, from what Mike Gorman suggests is now looking northwest from near the visitor center, almost nearly opposite where the other picture was taken. So that means the other one was taken while this stuff was going on. It kind of brings you back into the time, like that when Gardner's guy, Reekie, was taking that picture. Maybe he's hearing digging and the absolute, I'm not sure if the smells of battle would have still been there after 10 months, but this had to be a disagreeable task. You can see that the remains are falling apart by then. Sometimes you can see the clothing is still attached. There's one where you can see a leg bone coming out of a boot. And somehow this really humanizes things. I mean, these guys looking at these terrible visages, grinning skulls back at you, you don't know why they signed up. We might know why the South seceded, but as to why individual people fought or what their childhoods were like or how they felt about things, I mean, there is not, people love to come up with one thing, why everybody in the South fought and why everyone in the North fought and how they felt. And was everybody in the North anti-slavery and everybody in the South? It is every bit as complex as our lives are today. And I try hard, and I hope you all do too, to not broad brush the people of the past and judge them and put them into a box because their lives were diverse as well. And it's hard to imagine what must be. I mean, I think this reburial crew is probably being paid. In 1863, it was $1.59 a body to dig someone up and box them up. So this would be some good money. And these guys, there's a good chance that they were experiencing freedom, only recently. I don't know that for sure. I don't know these guys, but and now they might be being paid for this work in doing the work of people who are, at least some of whom, are fighting for their freedom.
I mean, these are grim photos, obviously, but to me, it really puts an exclamation point on how horrible war is in general and the cost of it. And also, man, these poor people, I mean, yeah, they're getting paid for their work, but my gosh, what a grim task to have to go. And so let me back out here. Again, we're looking at a broad view of the photo. Gary, I know I'm not going to show you anything that you don't know, but here's something that I picked out from this photo. Again, looking at the background, I was zooming in and trying to see, okay, what are these guys doing in the background?
Mm-hmm.
And you look at this guy, it looks like he's either picking a cantaloupe or a human skull.
Yeah, I tend to think the latter. I mean, and this would not be surprising given what you see in the foreground of this photo. Obviously, they were gathering remains. And I do know this. Sometimes when people were moved to the national cemeteries, such as at Antietam, they only took the long bones. And I'm
Really?
not sure if these guys were instructed to take skulls and long bones and not metatarsals and metacarpals and rib bones. But in some of the remains that have been found on battlefields, including at Antietam in the late 80s, they found only ribs, fingers, hands, and little bones, and they were only reinterring in some cases the long bones. So it could be that he's grabbing that skull and he's going to grab a little bit more, and that's going to get them, that's going to fulfill their job at the
Wow.
time. Another thing I'll note is that, something Mike Gorman would look at, you can see some brush behind there and you see some woods even further behind. I don't know what I'm seeing as far as that white stuff in the background there. I don't think that those are tents there. That wouldn't make any sense. But what is that exactly? This is, April, so it shouldn't be a lot of foliage there, but there are woods behind there. And that, given the maps and everything, would tell us that if Mike Gorman's right, you're looking right to near the Confederate line where some of the most terrible attacks took place on June 3rd. So, I mean, once you know when and where a photo was taken, this is William Fresnito's work, really showing it switches a photo into a historical document that is more rich in information than almost any other historical document.
Wow. One thing I'll add, just kind of a shameless plug, you mentioned the shovel and how objects connect us with history. We've got a whole series on the History Underground called American Artifact that focuses, like History Traveler is focused on place, American Artifact focused on objects. Both of them are things that connect us to history. Cool. All right, I threw this one in here just because I thought it would warm your heart.
Good, yes, and it does. And here, we have photos of photographic wagons, sometimes called what's it wagon, because what is it wagon? They didn't know what it was when it showed up in camp. By 1864, everybody knew what this was. This was a wet plate photographic process, okay? So you took a glass plate, and JD, if you'll zoom in one more, you can see not only the wagon, but you see that this photographic assistant there is holding something in his hand. That is a glass plate, one of those 4 by 10-inch glass plates. So again, looking at that.
I didn't even notice that when I got this
picture. That's how big the negative is. So trust me on that. And because you're going to coat it with a chemical sheet, you could not, and it's actually called collodion, and that's later what they would make liquid bandages out of, this sort of combination of things that could dry up really quickly. So you had to develop this thing within 1 minute, 3 minutes, maybe 4 if it's wet outside and humid. But you had to have your photographic wagon near it. In other words, sometimes some of these photos show the darkroom wagons. Those are the wagons in which those photos were developed. The photo that you're looking at was developed in that darkroom wagon. And you can also see next to him, I think you have even one more blow up that's going to show some of the chemicals and bottles that they brought with them. And you see a tent there. They slept. Sometimes even attached to their photo wagon. Sometimes you can see a crate on the photo wagon that says Brady on it and things like that. I mean, these guys lived while they went out in the field and looked for the perfect opportunity, and without exposing themselves to too much danger. There's very few examples of where a photographer is known to be directly under fire, but it was a rough life. We don't have journals from the photographers, but you can just tell in looking at it, while they might have had it better than some of the soldiers, they really went to a lot of expense and trouble to try to get these photos here.
Definitely a lot more involved than snapping a photo with your iPhone.
Yes.
Okay, now, when I sent you the presentation, I purposefully left this out because I wanted I wanted to get your reaction and see what you're seeing kind of fresh. So I pulled this off of the Library of Congress.
Okay.
So let me read you what they have as far as the title of, or what they put on here. It says Private Franklin D. Hamilton of Company A, 10th Massachusetts Infantry Regiment, and companies E and B of the 28th Massachusetts Infantry Regiment, standing in the middle. I won't say what they're holding, but the X over the individual in the middle, they're saying is someone who was wounded on June 3rd at Cold Harbor, and then was discharged for his wounds on January 3rd, 1865 at Worcester, Massachusetts.
Worcester.
So let's zoom in on this, and I just want you to tell me what you see when you're analyzing a photo like this.
Okay, so I'm looking at the guy in the bottom here, and I'm seeing a pretty typical dude. One thing that I usually am with my colleague Chris White, and he's great on material culture and weapons, so I've never really gotten so into this, but I'm seeing a pretty grim, determined dude. I'm seeing a guy who looks like he's more likely to be fighting out west. I don't know the 10th in these units
Mhm.
necessarily as well, but that hat is screaming a little bit more, a little bit less mid-war Yankee than anything else. I think, was it the guy on the top you said was wounded in Cold Harbor?
Yes. So this guy
Yeah.
right here.
Yeah, it looks like I'm seeing they're holding knives, at least the two guys on both sides there. I noticed the bayonets are fixed right there. They're wearing U.S. buckles. They've got their regular size breastplate on there, on their cartridge box strap, which is pretty cool. It's funny that the two guys on the left and center both have the same collared shirt out, from their thing, and the other guys don't. They have them tucked in. Now, I think what you're trying to get at is, what is the dude in the middle holding there? It's really it's really hard to tell. It almost looks like it's too big to be a gun. It looks like a stick of dynamite, but I assume it's not going to be that. And I'm sure there's some people watching who are like, "Come on, Gary, you should be getting this," but it's got like a flat top on it. It looks like a big steel bar or something like that. I'm not coming up with something necessarily, but I bet JD has a theory on this.
So the tag on, I don't know for sure either. The tag on the photo that the Library of Congress has says that it's possibly a stick of dynamite, which I
Wow.
thought was really interesting. And I didn't know if there was, like, if it is a stick of dynamite, right after Cold War. I don't know when this picture was taken or anything like that, but we're getting pretty close to the part of the Civil War where they're starting to do some tunneling and things like that. I didn't know if there was any kind of connection there.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's interesting that you would say that because there is a tunnel episode. There's a tunnel being dug, I believe, south of the Cold Harbor Road. I'm not
Oh,
aware that they're blowing that thing out with dynamite. I don't know anything about dynamite being used at Cold Harbor in 1864. TNT was pretty new at around that time. And I would be amazed. I mean, are they even saying that they're seeing the fuse there almost toward the middle, like above his shoulder? There's the end of the fuse.
I don't know. All they say that is that it's possibly a stick of dynamite.
Yeah. Well, I will say that you heard me say it. I mean, it was one of my, that's what it sort of looked like to me. It looks a little bit big, honestly, in his hand. And I think that when people come to me on my page and see things in photos that I don't, I usually accuse them of seeing what they want to see.
Mhm.
And it's possible that the Library of Congress tech or, whoever got it to the Library of Congress. And by the way, if that is a photo from the Lillianquist collection, Tom Lillianquist is very careful in what he says, and I'm glad that they put a qualifier on it. I'm very skeptical of it. I'd love it if it was, because how cool it was, but it's not necessarily connected with the Battle of Cold Harbor, as far as I know. I want to
So
say one other thing.
we're doing
I'd
some.
mentioned that.
Oh,
Sorry.
I was say we're doing some real time fact checking here. I just saw in the comments someone said that dynamite wasn't invented until after the Civil War,
Yeah.
and yeah, I just looked it up, and yeah, dynamite was invented in 1867.
Yeah, and TNT though is
TN
around in 1863, as
Yeah,
far as I know, but not necessarily dynamite. But it could be a stick of some sort of explosive. But I'm with him. I really don't think that's what it is.
yeah.
And
It almost, I've seen some like pistols before that had like multiple barrels, um,
there's
and I
someone
don't know when they
watching.
come about, but
Yeah, yeah, and my friend Craig Calandro says he doesn't think it's dynamite, and I like to agree with Craig because he gets super mad when people disagree with him. Sorry, man, just kidding. But what I would say is, sometimes we want something to be that, and especially for Cold Harbor, because it's not only that there was one attack and everybody died in that one attack on June 3rd, and it was north of the road. There's also the thing is that, oh my God, they knew how bad it would be, and everybody pinned their, names onto their coats because there weren't dog tags then. I mean, so they've taken these myths of Cold Harbor and they've really grown. And I would be absolutely, mortified if this stick of dynamite turns out that's the dynamite that was going to blow up the mine. And then they took it to the crater and they made it. Like, this is how these things get started. It's dangerous.
there's also a theory that I'm seeing in the sidebar is that it could be a pepper box revolver.
Yeah, I thought about the backside of a gun, but it looks really smooth in size. I would think that it would be switching. But what I would say is, Fort Treasure, download the high resolution version yourself. JD has provided enough information for you to search prints and photographs online catalog at the Library of Congress, and you can download that, or maybe JD has the digital ID with it. But find it, download it, and put it on the History Underground what you think it is, because it's got that really flat top. And that doesn't look like dynamite, even if we've already dispensed with that. It looks like a metal cap of some sort on something. But
the multiple holes is what kind of threw me, wondering that made me question the dynamite part.
But, yeah, and could it be a pickle jar that's filled with dark liquid, or something like that? I mean, there could be imperfections on the pictures that make us see things that's a print, of course, not a negative. Yeah. So, I mean, those prints are harder to zoom in on than the glass plate negatives.
This is the fun and the thrill of online archaeology is looking and trying to pick out these little details and then pick it apart. So we're approaching an hour here, and I want to be respectful of your time. So you guys are currently, at the time that we're recording this, going through your Overland campaign. You've covered the wilderness and Spotsylvania. I'm assuming, maybe, do we have some Cold Harbor content that's on the horizon?
Maybe. We of course did. We went from the wilderness and Germanna Ford and covered all that to Todd's Tavern first, where there's a little action there. And then we're still at Spotsylvania here. And then we're going to move on to North Anna. I know this because we have already pre-shot some of this. We can't do this one in real time. There's too many videos and too much editing. Yeah. JD knows. Anybody who has a channel knows that making 15 videos, you're not doing that on the fly, even with a team usually. So then we're going to move on to North Anna. I can't remember what we're doing for some of these other ones, Haw Shop and Totopotomy. But yes, we'll head on to Cold Harbor, which many people see as the end of the Overland campaign. By far the most persistent and by far the most costly campaign of the Civil War. Nothing else is even close to this. It makes the previous summer with Gettysburg as by far the largest battle look like a warm-up exercise compared to the casualties incurred in the 6 weeks of the Overland campaign. So there's a lot to tell. The stakes are high, and it's, of course, going to lead to Petersburg and eventually the end of the war in the East.
Yeah, and I'm loving everything so far, because it's really taken a deep dive, and it's taken a big battle and it's dividing it down into bite-sized chunks. By the way, I'm going back to the dynamite real quick. I think we've got the best possible theory so far as to what it is. It might be a chicken tamale.
Yeah, and I see maybe pork. As well. And by the way, one of the photographers is in front of his photo wagon at Cold Harbor. In another picture, he's got a Brady thing behind him, and he's got a big turkey leg. So I think you're onto something. Somebody says telescope. I think that's another good one. I would think the glass on the top, maybe it has the cap on it. So maybe it does. But why does an infantryman with all of his gear have a telescope? I mean, that's really an officer's or a signal corps guy's. So and the black gripper handle, I'm seeing a lot.
If I'm getting my picture taken and I'm a soldier in the Civil War, and I have the option of grabbing a big pig stick or Bowie knife, or a rifle or a pistol, I'm not going to grab the telescope.
Yeah. Nor am I going to grab the dynamite, because nobody knows what it is. It's not even invented yet.
Yeah. So hey, one last thing. You all just recently, so you're running the stuff on the Overland campaign and the wilderness. Recently declared the wilderness as, you correct me on the terminology that you all used, but basically a historically endangered site. Is that?
Yes.
So tell me a little bit about what's going on there.
Well, and thanks for that, JD. We sometimes declare battlefields most endangered, but in this case, the National Trust for Historic Preservation has declared the wilderness one of the 11 most endangered historic sites in America. They also put a second battlefield on there because battlefields are under threat, which is Minuteman, Lexington, and Concord from the Revolution. A lot of these threats come specifically from the growth of a sort of a new sort of thing, a threat we didn't face 10 years ago, and that is data centers, these massive block buildings with servers in them to help support all the things that many of us do. A lot of us like Amazon. A lot of us love tech products like the one we're using to come to you today. But this requires a lot of data and data centers. And these data centers are often powered by massive solar farms that take up even more land, and sometimes battlefield land with its rural character along major routes of transportation is still affordable in places like Virginia. So there is a massive danger of what's happening there. The Battlefield Trust, the American Battlefield Trust, is involved in a lawsuit, and our members have been stepping up to support that, because sometimes we don't like fighting with developers, but sometimes these developers, and working with local officials, are able to put them in other places. We don't oppose data centers or solar farms. We just don't want them on battlefields. And we feel the same way about commercial entities and residential housing. I mean, people need to live somewhere, businesses need to be conducted, and we do need these data centers to live in the 21st century like we do now, but we just don't want them there. And overall, the amount of battlefield land, as much as it seems like there is pretty small compared to the amount of rural land that is available, that isn't quite so historic, isn't so blood-soaked, isn't so hallowed, as Abraham Lincoln would put it.
Yeah, and here's the deal. With that stuff, once it's gone, it's gone. And even in the rare cases, I'm thinking Franklin off the top of my head, where the battlefield is recovered and the buildings are removed, there's still a little bit of that integrity of the battlefield that you lose. You might clear it, but it's still not quite the same.
Yeah, unless you have a topographical map. And, by the way, that's something we're doing. I mean, the trust doesn't lose a lot, but we don't always win. And we lost the battlefield of Hawes Shop. It's a cavalry battle right before Cold Harbor. It was pristine 5 years ago, and now it's covered with 10-acre housing plots and McMansions. We did everything we could, but we can't make anybody sell to us. And sometimes, other entities can offer 3-4 times appraised value to get what they want. So now we have these things we can do called digital twins, where you can make an architecturally capable digital scan of land, structures, and otherwise, so that reclamation might be a little bit more possible. But reclamation is terrible. Sometimes it's a quarter acre at a time, and you're removing something only to do it again and hope you can do it. And it is never the same. Industrial, even solar farms and industrial level, anything changes topography, often ends up with water ponds where they weren't, and certainly disrupts the historic resources in the ground that inform our understanding. I mean, if you find a friction primer here, they were firing a cannon there or nearby. So it really is disturbing, and it's a tough situation. We work with these people as much as we can. We don't see them as the enemy. We just want to urge them to be in other places.
Yeah. Well, and in addition to that, and I'll say this, and we'll kind of put a bow on it here. As somebody who's an outdoorsman and enjoys hunting and fishing and wildlife and things like that, there's an ecological element to what you all are doing as well that I appreciate.
Thanks so much, man. And I'll say that, it's sometimes it's a quarter acre at a time. Sometimes it's, 500 acres at a time, but it totals up to something larger than Manhattan Island now. So we've saved, 57,000 acres in 27 states. And again, all due to JD and a few other people like him who are the 45,000 members of the trust. So for those trust members on here, I'm seeing through your YouTube names, some people I definitely know, and have seen before. And I thank everybody for your support. And JD, for having me on, man, I'm honored. It's been great to watch you just absolutely rock this channel and become the star you were meant to be, and still be humble about it.
Hey, all right, we're going to wrap this up then. It's getting uncomfortable. All right. Well, hey, I know, like I said, I know you're a super busy guy. Thanks for carving out an hour to help us learn a little bit more about the Civil War.
Everybody, the trust has lots of events coming up this summer. And if you like this photographic stuff, we have, I'm part of the Center for Civil War Photography. I'm the only vice president they've ever had for more than 20 years. And I run a photographic seminar with more energy than you're seeing right now. And it'll be in Gettysburg this year, October 4 to 6. So go to imageofwar.org if you're interested in that. And of course, go to battlefields.org for all your Civil War, Rev War, and 1812 stuff.
All right. Thanks, man.
Thanks, man. Thanks, everybody.
All right. So, hey, just kind of wrapping things up. So this, we only scratched the surface here. So a few resources or places that
I'm seeing you on my, Okay.
Oh,
this is everybody. Okay. This is for everybody, right?
Yeah. We're wrapping it up here.
Sorry, JD. I thought we were about to have a private talk and we were still live. Sorry.
I'll jump back on here and talk to you in a second.
Okay.
So a couple of different resources that I'll refer you to on Facebook. Gary's Civil War page is outstanding. He's constantly sharing photos and showing these little details and things like that. Also, the Center for Civil War Photography is outstanding. And then we've already been talking quite a bit about the American Battlefield Trust. It's one of the few organizations that I financially support because I believe in what they're doing and know that the work that they are doing is going to echo for generations. So definitely check them out. Hopefully you enjoyed a little bit of what we had here. Garry doesn't know it yet, but we're going to bring him back and we're going to do this again at some point. But anyway, have a good evening.